Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 4 Minutes from Midnight Virtual Band Project score study videos. I'm Yoshio Yamashita. I am the director of the virtual band, and I'm also the composer of the symphony 4 Minutes from Midnight. Today's video is going to be an overview of the Piccolo, Flute 1, and Flute 2 parts, whereas this video is labeled the Flute parts. And we're going to be looking at some key moments in the piece in relation to the score, as well as some technical problems and spots that I want to point out before you record your parts for the project. The first section I'd like to address is this section at letter A. And the primary thing I'd like to address here is for players to watch their accidentals very carefully. If you'll look here in the flute 2 part in bar number 2, or it's bar 7, but the second bar of letter A, you'll notice second flute has E flat, G flat, C, G flat, E flat, and then G natural, C sharp, G natural, then E natural. So just make sure you're watching your accidentals, mark in all your accidentals as needed. Notice that this opening does not have a key signature. So all notes that are not marked with an accidental are natural. That includes B natural, E natural, A natural, so on and so forth. The piccolo part is doubled. If you'll look in the first clarinet part and in the first alto sax part, the flute 1 and flute 2 parts are the only parts that have this triplet figure repeating over and over. Piccolo, it's very important that you subdivide carefully here. These runs are often not as fast as your head or your fingers think they are. So just be careful, use a metronome, practice slowly. Flutes, again, flute 2, this is bar 16. Watch those accidentals. Make sure you're crescendoing up to letter C. This is an abrupt cutoff. There is no downbeat. Letter D, legato, smooth, chorale style playing. You've played things like that before. At letter F, first flutes, you're divided, or divisi. You've got these sextuplets. There is no count in into letter F. If you watch the conductor video, I believe what I'm trying to do there is subdivide into eighth notes for you to help you get a sense of the tempo a little better. However, the thing that will help you the most is just practicing that transition from letter E to letter F, because there's no mathematical proportional relationship between the two tempo numbers. You're just going to need to be able to navigate that very cleanly by feel. What I'd ordinarily do if we were playing this piece in a concert setting, if you'll notice that if you look at the full score, 4 bars before the tempo change, there's a chimes hit, and it just lets ring for those 4 bars, and there's nothing rhythmic. What I'd do is I'd treat that like a fermata and then count off the tempo for letter F. However, the way the click track for this project works is there's actually a click track that counts through all of those measures. So I can't conduct in the new tempo until the new tempo starts. Otherwise, it starts getting confusing. Again, divisi flute 2, you come in a measure after flute 1. Make sure to subdivide the tempos fairly slow. So make sure you aren't rushing through those eighth notes and that they're actually staccato. Here, 4 bars before G, just nice and legato. I know I don't have legato markings over every single note, but use your musical intuition and base your playing and your phrasing off of the music that precedes the phrase or your entrance or whatever you're supposed to play. Here at letter G, piccolo and flute are doubled in the same octave. Notice that this E flat in the flute part, or flute 1, excuse me, and this E flat in the piccolo part are the same note, the same pitch, same octave. This is one type of doubling I do. The other type of doubling is when the piccolo is an octave above either the flute 1 or flute 2 part, whichever one it's doubling. Flute 2 with these fivelets. Practice with a metronome and practice slowly. One of the things that I suggest to people that are unfamiliar with odd numbered tuplets, such as 5s, 7s, and 9s, is to figure out a word like university or geophysical or any other 5-syllable word you'd like, and superimpose that on top of a quarter note click, just like you count 1 E and 2 E and for 16th notes, or 1 and 2 and for 8th notes. You can count university, university, or geophysical, geophysical for 5s. And then for 7s, I don't have a word, but you can make up a 7-syllable phrase or find a 7-syllable word and do the same thing there. Again, watch those fivelets and the subdivision. At letter H, make sure to count your rests very carefully. Mixed meter is sometimes difficult to count correctly. Flute 1 and flute 2 here, right before I at your entrance. This is a true pianissimo you're playing here with the oboes and first and second clarinet. So it's a decent sized choir, decent sized woodwind choir. And then piccolo, you're playing alone, so you're marked a dynamic higher. Flute 2, one point of interest here is the tied note here. Let's listen to that real quickly. I know it's difficult to hear because it's marked pianissimo and it's obviously very quiet. But what I'd like for you to do at that particular moment is lean on the tied F and then the resolution to E flat. That's just garden variety suspension and resolution, but it's a special harmonic moment there since everything else is very vertically harmonic, meaning that, you know, all of your chord changes happen at the same time in every part. This is one time where it doesn't happen like that, that the chord change happens flat, G for first flute, and then F, wait, E flat for second flute. So just emphasize that lean on it. You have rest until letter K, and then the first flute solo. The first 2 bars are a real solo, meaning that it's just you and the clarinets accompanying. And then the oboe solo comes in the 3rd bar of that. So let's listen to that. So what's happening there is the oboe solo is taking the melody here in the 3rd bar, quote unquote, and you're playing kind of a counterpoint to it. Notice that your notes are higher than what the oboe's playing. The oboe's playing inside the treble clef staff and then up to a B flat while you have a D. So be mindful of that. Be mindful that the 3rd and 4th measure, you're not playing the melody line. Flute 1 and flute 2, 4th bar of letter K. Please observe this triplet figure very carefully. You need to be subdividing 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a triplet instead of dotted 8th, 16th here in beat 4. The triplet is different from this dotted 8th, 16th figure. Make sure you're making that difference. Letter L we discussed thematically in score study video number 4. So I'm going to skip past it, obviously playing in a very smooth chorale type style. Letter M I discussed in score study video number 1, which is an overview of part 1. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. Flute 1, this run is not as fast as your fingers might make it out to be. So be careful of that. Practice slowly and just really be mindful that every note has a place in the rhythmic grid of what's happening. Letter O is a reprise of what happened earlier, I believe at letter L. It's just transposed from F major to E flat major, so down a half step or down a whole step, excuse me. And then it resolves into A minor, C major at letter P. Again, it's that same theme, which is covered in score study video number 3. Second flute, your divisi here, I didn't write that in, but hopefully you can figure that out on your own. Please note the little annotation here, lower divisi dropout, do not switch notes. That's enhancing this diminuendo here, so fewer people playing means less sound, which means it's quieter. Flute solo here, the pickups are augmented, meaning that instead of 2/8 notes, as they are here right before letter S, they are 2 half notes, which just helps drag things out, create a little more pathos there. Although these are bar or slurred in 1 measure segments, think of them in 4 measure phrases, and then in larger 8-bar sentences or long phrases. Here, clarinet 1 comes in and joins you. Flute 2 and piccolo, make sure to count this 3/4 bar appropriately. Let's go ahead and listen to this particular moment where you start doubling with clarinet 1. Hopefully that was a little easier to hear. I'm trying to keep the volume fairly low because some of the loud moments in this piece are very loud if I have the volume up too high. Notice that with clarinet 1, there's a little denser orchestration and there are more instruments playing, so it becomes necessary for more instruments to be added on there. Letter S is a reprise of that theme in kind of a slightly different setting. Again, just that smooth legato phrasing, 4 measure phrases, and then those larger 8-bar phrases. Piccolo and flute are in the same octave doubling, and then flute 2 plays harmony. And then just a very long and drawn out cadence leading into the second phrase, which is mostly the same again. Think of this as one long 8-bar phrase instead of 2 4-bar phrases. Reason being that if you think of it in 4-bar phrases, you break this slur and this tie up. So just think of this as kind of one very long 8-bar phrase that ends here at letter T. Second flute, you will have to re-articulate right here in order to catch this final slur, so that's why I have a secondary slur there. And remember, even though the direction of the notes is going upward, you're still decrescendoing. If you're planning on watching this video in 2 parts, you can go ahead and pause here. This is the end of part 1. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to part 2, which encompasses movements 3 and 4. All right, so looking at movements 3 and 4, the opening, again, has a key signature which does not include every accidental that's in the run that starts you off. So observe those accidentals carefully. These are just really flourishes, trills, fanfare type figures. All trills here are fast trills. So make sure that you're putting a sufficient volume of notes in each trill. Again, with this fivelet, it's probably slower than you think it is. So use a metronome and figure that out and practice slowly at first and then place it in context later. Again, with the remainder of these runs. Really attack this sforzando and then subito mezzo forte, so don't decrescendo this figure. At letter B, the piccolo solo starts after 2 bars of a timpani roll, from sforzando to niente or nothing. You're playing alone all the way through the 5/4 bar. Let's look at the condensed score, which is a little easier to read. The piccolo solo you'll see here goes through the 5/4 bar, nothing else is playing. First clarinet and first oboe join you at that 3/4 bar, and then flute 1 on beat 3 of the following bar, the 4/4 bar. And then you've seen this chorale phrase before in a different key in part 1 at letter D. Letter C is much of the same material, so I'm going to skip over it. The analysis of this particular theme is covered in, I believe it's score study number 4, the themes part 2 video. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check that out. Again, just good chorale style playing, observance of dynamics, listening to the phrasing of the recording, and just playing very musically and lyrically. Letter E is a reprise of letter S from part 1. So if you'll remember, letter S was the solo that was introduced in the big long flute solo, although it's in F minor instead of C minor. And what you'll see is the piccolo and second flute have melody. Second flute also has harmony on the lower divisi. And first flute has what we call a counter melody, or kind of a descant line. So let's go ahead and listen to that. Piccolo, notice that you cut off a few beats earlier. Second flute, remember this D natural and E natural carry through this entire measure 2 bars before F. Again, this material at letter F I talk about in score study number 4. Piccolo here, bar before G. You'll see this again later in the movement, or later in part 2 in the 4th movement. So I'll point that out when we get there. For flute 1 and flute 2, what you'll hear is there's a chimes hit that lines up with the downbeat here, 1 bar before G. You'll hear the piccolo solo. There will be a timpani hit on the 2/4 bar on the downbeat. And then if you watch the conductor video, I'll cue you into the 4/4 bar. Again, just nice chorale playing until letter H. Letter H is a complete copy and paste recapitulation of the beginning. So all of the same reminders with the fivelets and the runs and the sforzando apply there. Piccolo, here's the recurrence of that triplet figure that you saw at, I believe, letter G. If you watch the conductor video, I'm not going to get into explaining how I'm dealing with this particular fermata in this video, but if you watch the conductor video and listen to the click track, you'll see how that's worked out. Piccolo, this is a C to D flat trill. Notice D flat is not in the key signature. First flute, again, notice the D flat carries all the way through the measure. This is a solo. At letter K, piccolo and second flute, crescendo slightly, and then subito piano at letter L. So first flute can be heard. These are also C to D. These are C to D flat trills as well, although I did not mark that, so please mark that in your part. Piccolo, since there's only one of you playing, you can take a breath after that second measure if necessary. If you can make it all the way through in one breath, great. Here, second flute, observe your dynamics. We're crescendoing from mezzo forte to forte by beat 4. Piccolo, there is no forte piano. Don't do a forte piano. The trill is forte, crescendo through the bar up to beat 1 of M, and then back down to subito forte. So you're crescendoing to forte fortissimo and then coming back down to subito forte. So the crescendo from forte going to forte is not a mistake. First and second flute, just your standard forte piano going back to forte. Again, at M, all of these are fast trills. All of these fanfare type figures, the triplets, and all the runs are very bold. The triplets are marcato. Everything that's slurred is obviously slurred, but aggressive. This little fanfare figure at N will come back later. Again, same thing up here in the piccolo, an octave higher. Second flutes, you have this little fanfare motif that comes from letter G in part 1. If you go back and listen to the recording, it's not in any of the flute parts, but it's in the brass at letter G in part 1. It's in the first movement. I also talk about that in the score study number 3 video. Piccolo and flute, you have the sforzando with this descending chromatic scale. Make sure you attack with a true sforzando, then down piccolo down to piano, first flute down to mezzo piano, then down to pianissimo, second flute doubling in octaves. Now realize that you're going to get softer, especially second flutes, as you go down the register in your instrument. And we still want to be able to hear you by the time you hit pianissimo at the end. So make sure that you retain enough volume that we can hear the notes you're playing. The effect is just the general fade out effect. Same thing here with first flute. You can play a little bit louder because there's only one of you, but still the same general effect. There's a horn chorale at letter O, and then the brass chorale starts at letter P. Second flutes, divisi, piccolo, and first flute here. You can ignore the 1 to 2 players and then the 3 players thing because we don't have enough players to create that effect. But the general effect is just a fanfare that goes on in the back. What you'll notice is the melody or the chorale that happens at P and Q is the same both times. It's orchestrated differently. But the fanfare you have right here repeats itself in the trumpets at letter R, which I do talk about, I believe, in either Score Study 2 or Themes Part 1, which is Score Study 3. Here you'll find the kind of the grand finale of the piece at letter Q. First flute and second flute, you'll see things that are pretty similar to what you had at letter M, with all of the fanfares and the trills and the runs. Just be very clean, very articulate, be very purposeful with the runs, and make sure that they are in rhythm and you're not just kind of plowing through them and hoping you get to beat 1 or beat 2 or beat 3 or beat 4 on time. Piccolo has melody. First flute, you start having the melody, and second flute, you also start having the melody here at bar 167, beat 4. At letter R, second flute and piccolo, you have the melody in octaves. First flutes, make sure these sevens and then the triplets leading into the sevens are very clean and that we're not rushing through them. Again, what I said earlier about finding a 7-syllable word or phrase and just using that to subdivide the beat, practicing slowly with a metronome, finding a strategy that works for you. Same thing applies here with the 5 and 7 going into another 5 in the first flute part, the 5s and 7s in the piccolo part. Second flutes, you still have the melody there. This 2/4 bar signifies kind of the end of a phrase that leads into a brief coda, which reprises this fanfare figure from letter N, which I talk about just a little bit, I think, in either overview part 2, which is score study number 2, or score study 3, which is themes part 1. And then all of that leads into just a very long, drawn out C major chord and crescendoing to fortissimo to end the piece. Notice I do have a legato marking on this final 8th note. Instead of playing kind of a stinger like you would at the end of a march, on the 8th note, play the 8th note long. Hold it out for its full duration at the end. And that's the end of my analysis for part 2. And this concludes the analysis of the 2 flute parts and the piccolo part for the symphony. I hope this video was somewhat informational and helps you in your interpretation while you prepare your video for this project. If you have questions or comments on this video, or you'd like me to go over part of the piece that I didn't talk about in this video analysis, you can email at 4minutesvirtual@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.